Hey guys, Graham here again from Bike Bros in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada, and today we are looking at the new 2025 Giant Revolt 1. This is one of two Giant Revolts in Canada, the Revolt 1 and Revolt 2. They are both alloy frame, carbon forked gravel bikes. This Revolt 1 we're looking at is $21.99. Those are Canadian dollars. There is also the Revolt 2, the lower spec version, which is $16.99 in Canada. This Revolt 1 is available in two colors. This particular color is called Pale Olive, and there is also a color called Metal. Once again, between those two bikes, they share the same frame, different colors between the Revolt 1 and 2. There are also Revolt Advanced bikes, and as soon as you see Advanced in a Giant name, that means carbon fiber. Then there is also a different line of bikes called the Revolt X. The difference there being that those Revolt X's are designed around having a single front chainring, not a double like this and the rest of the Revolts have, and also the Revolt X's have a suspension fork as opposed to this carbon advanced fork that's on here. If this is your first time coming to Bike Bros and seeing one of these videos, I'm Graham. I'm the owner of a bike shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. We sell Giant, Rocky Mountain, Marin, and Pivot. And what I like to do is go over the bikes that we carry so that you can be better informed to make a good purchasing decision, whether or not that is from us or anywhere else in the world. I will go over the specifications, talk about some of the things to do with maybe fit or comfort, so that hopefully by the end you understand the particular bike model you're looking at, so you basically have a resource to make smart decisions. Of course, I'm a bike shop owner, so I do have a bias towards the things that we sell, but I try to be as honest as possible, and if you go back through all of our reviews, you will often see me making criticisms about bikes that we sell, because no bike company has ever made a perfect bike, and I'm more than happy to use my 40 years of bike shop knowledge to point out the things that I see as shortcomings. So stick with me and you will learn more about this Giant Revolt 1. So touching on some of the key specifications on this bike, we are looking at a 2x10 drivetrain. This is a Shimano GRX 400 drivetrain on here. GRX, if you're not familiar, it is about the equivalent of Tiagra in the road lineup. And this 400 series is designed for 10-speed drivetrains. They go all the way up to making 1x12 GRX drivetrains. So don't be fooled if you just see GRX on anything. It could be this quality of bike, a $2,200 bike. It could also be a bike with 1x12 gearing and easily worth $5,000 sort of thing. But GRX is gravel specific. Part of what makes it gravel specific is the fact that it has a clutch in the rear derailleur. That makes this spring extremely strong. You have an on-off with your clutch so that you can disengage that really strong spring. The only reason that they give you that disengagement feature is if you happen to need to remove your rear wheel, say for a flat repair or something. Battling that really strong spring would make your life very difficult, so they give you the option to turn off the clutch. But when you're riding the bike, anything with a clutch, you want that engaged for that really strong spring. On this cassette here, we have a range from 11 to 34 teeth, and that is matched up with a 48-32 crankset on here. So between those, you're going to end up with about a 460% gear range. So a pretty broad range of gears. By this, only going up to 48 teeth on your big ring, that means you're probably going to spin this bike out at somewhere around 50 kilometers an hour. So keep in mind, on a gravel bike, there are more miles at lower speeds, and your gear range will basically reflect that. Now, one of the special things on this Revolt is the fact that this is a flip chip on the rear end of the bike. What that means is right now we're set up in the short mode, And with the flip chips flipped, you're basically adding 10 millimeters to the length of the rear end of the bike. And that will both make the bike more stable for higher speeds or for really chunky terrain. And it also, by moving the axle back, will allow you to have a bigger tire on the bike. So in the short range here, the stock tires are Giant crosscut ATs in a 38 millimeter wide size. In the short flip chip setup, you would be able to go up to a 45 millimeter wide tire. If you wanted to put bigger tires on and flip that flip chip position, you would then be able to go up to 53 millimeter wide tires. That is roughly the same as a 29 by 2 mountain bike tire. So quite a bit of capacity for tires on here. Another cool thing regarding the tires is the fact that Giant ships these bikes with tubeless tires, tubeless ready rims, sealant in there, and so this is a proper tubeless setup. And what that means for you is a tubeless tire can be ridden softer without the fear of a pinch flat, or the same amount of fear as you would have with a tube in there. That doesn't mean that you have to ride a tubeless. You can still take a tube with you as your way to get out of trouble if you got a flat out in the middle of nowhere. As I mentioned in the intro, this is an alloy frame on here. It is, so between the Revolt and the Revolt X, I mentioned that the Revolt is the bike set up for 2x drivetrain without a suspension fork. In the carbon bikes, they talk about the Revolt being their sort of raceable bike, but because of this ability to change the rear end length and go to quite big tires, I would say that both the Revolt and the Revolt X are basically crossovers with each other. You really are deciding which way to go depending on if you want a 2x drivetrain and if that suspension fork on a Revolt X means something to you. Otherwise, they're similar enough bikes that you could go either way. What we tend to find is that people that come from a road background, they prefer to have a front derailleur. What it really means in practicality is that you do end up with smaller jumps in your cadence between the gears. So if you're really watching your pedaling RPM, having this crossover of 2 in the front, 10 on the back, you get small jumps in your gears, so you can maybe stay within 5 RPM of sort of an ideal cadence that you want, as opposed to on a Revolt X, we've got a single front chainring and 11 or 12 gears in the back. Those jumps in gears are bigger, and instead of being plus or minus 5 RPM, you might be plus or minus 8 or 10 RPM with a single front chainring. On this bike, because there's such a broad use of purposes for it, it could be anything from a commuting bike to a gravel bike to a drop bar light bikepacking bike. It is trying to give you a lot of the things that make it practical for all those things. So we have things like the threaded bosses on the top of the dropout here. That would be if you wanted some fenders or some pannier racks would mount using that sort of thing. There are also threaded plugs in here, so you can mount stuff on there. There are little pieces of hardware that Giant provides with the bike that would make that even more useful for mounting fenders or something. And then there is even this accessory here, which is basically something you'd be able to clamp onto the seat post so that you could mount a pannier rack off the back to give you a rack back here. So a pretty broadly usable bike for a number of different purposes, between keeping it light like this or putting racks, fenders on, and packing everything but the kitchen sink on there. As we just kind of zoom back here a little bit, we look at the fact that there are water bottle mounts on the seat tube. There are water bottle mounts on the down tube, and they give you room that you can basically move your bottle up or down depending on a big bottle or small, or if you have other things like a frame bag that you wanted to mount in here. There are also bento box mounts on the top of the top tube here, so there are some bags and some feeding bags, things like that, that will use that same mounting position. And then if we go back down to the bottom of the frame, there are another set of mounts down here that another bottle cage could be mounted. And in addition to that stuff on the frame, the forks have mounts here as well on both sides. So lots of room to really use this like a bike packing bike and attach stuff. Now the first shortcoming I will point out, as I mentioned, they've got the clutch in here, which makes things really stiff. Part of what they're trying to do with that clutch is to control the chain and how much freedom of movement that has as you're going through really bumpy terrain. And that is to basically help minimize the chance of derailing when you're going through really bouncy stuff or bumpy stuff. But even with that clutch on, I would say the first shortcoming I would see is the fact that there is just a very clear sort of a sticker to protect this from chain slap. If we imagine the chain riding on one of these smaller gears here, it wouldn't take much bouncing around there to start rattling the chain off the frame. So if you're going to get one of these on mountain bikes, it's becoming pretty common that the bike comes with a very substantial rubber protection over the chainstay. I would be wrapping an old inner tube or one of those neoprene style things from a company like Lizard Skin to just protect the paint here, and it also reduces noise, all that sort of stuff. So we've got that, we've got, going back up to the seat post, I mentioned that piece that can clamp onto the seat post. This is what they call a Defuse Seatpost. So instead of being round all the way around here, the back section here is flat. And the idea there is to allow some sort of flex to allow your seat post to work as a bit of a shock absorber as you're bumping down the road. So Defuse is the name that they give to that. That same name is also attached to these handlebars because it has similar shaping to the alloy in here to allow, once again, when you're going over really bumpy stuff, a little bit of flex in your handlebars so that you're taking some of the shock out of your hands when they're sitting on top of your hoods here. Now, one thing about sizing on these bikes, we're looking at a medium large today. This is a 23.5 pound bike in its stock setup like this. I'm 6'1" and I would probably pick a medium large in this particular bike. Its top tube measurement is 575 millimeters for a medium large. The large goes to 585. And I would say the current wisdom is that you size gravel bikes a little bit smaller than road bikes because you're trying to put your body in a position that isn't only about being aerodynamic and powerful. You're trying to control the bike and trying to be in a position where your elbows can really absorb some of the shock coming up through the handlebars. So going a little bit shorter in length is quite common. So that 575, I would certainly be leaning towards a medium large myself. So if you're especially on the cusp between sizes, consider probably going down sort of a half size to a full size from what you would usually be considering. As I mentioned, alloy frame, it's Giant's Alex material. Giant does a fantastic job with their aluminum. They are everything from the foundry to the manufacturer of the actual aluminum tubes. Same thing when it comes to their carbon fiber forks. They go all the way from raw carbon thread and turn that into a product. And they're just very well known for making good quality stuff that tends to be quite durable and quite well made. As I mentioned on the back, there's a through axle that's going through that flip chip. You also have a through axle on the fork. That is the end of the through axle. That is another little threaded insert here, and that would be useful for mounting a front rack or front fender. There is no threaded portion on the back of the fork arch, but there is one hidden up in the bottom of the fork. So if you did want to run a fender, you would just be mounting it with that one threaded hole in the very bottom there. Another thing about the details of this bike, these handlebars, not particularly wide and not particularly big flares on the drops, which is something that we see on a lot of gravel bikes. I find that people's liking or not liking of the big flare and big wide handlebars is quite personal. So some people might be turned off by the fact that this doesn't have the big wide flared bars. For others, I think they're going to be happy. And this once again goes back to, if you come from a road background, this whole bike is going to be a little bit more at home for you. If you come from a really mountain biking background, between having a front derailleur, between your handlebars not being quite as wide, you might feel a little bit like a fish out of water. So this really is a road rider's gravel bike, and then the Revolt X being a little bit more of the mountain biker's gravel bike. One nice thing with these handlebars, hopefully that shows from this angle, but you do have a little bit of sweep on these handlebars, which will help you get hand comfort when you're riding in the flats here. And these GRX 400 hoods are a really nice feeling hood. You can reach around and get to your brakes, and it's quite comfortable on your fingers to be grabbing a handful of brakes with that. I'm just going to step around the other side of the bike here so you can see a couple details. So this does have hydraulic disc brakes on it. These are the standard GRX brakes on here. A really nice feature, if you can see this sort of finned profile. I don't know if this is standard from Shimano or if Giant specifically asks for it, but finned brake pads are usually an extra charge over non-finned brake pads. The idea being these extra fins work like a radiator, so they'll dissipate heat. So if you happen to be going down longer hills where you might be feeling brake fade from regular brake pads, the fact that these are a little bit higher quality brake pads with the fins should help you to not experience brake fade, or not as soon. We have internal cable routing, so they've got kind of a funky thing where two cables are going inside this port on the head tube, and then one going in down here. Now the one thing I noticed with the way they've done this is it doesn't look like, if you wanted to, there is nowhere to run a dropper cable. So once again, to go along with the suspension fork on a Revolt X and the one by drivetrain, Revolt X in many cases comes stock, or maybe in all cases now, with a dropper seat post. So another thing that makes it more mountain biker friendly, and another thing that on this bike a little bit more road biker friendly. Stepping back, I didn't talk about this. These are FSA cranks on here. There's nothing to write home about them. They're just a good crank with a good replaceable set of alloy chainrings. What's nice to see on here is the fact that we do have an external bottom bracket, and this is a threaded bottom bracket, not a press fit. So that is going to be a little bit easier for home maintenance, just being able to spin out the bottom bracket when it comes time to replace it, or if you're getting creaking, you potentially pull it out and just clean up the threads if you've been through some really disgusting wet or dusty conditions. Otherwise, that's been most of the features of this Revolt 1. As mentioned, the Revolt 1 is the better of two different alloy Revolts available in Canada, at least, the second one being the Revolt 2 at $16.99. I don't believe that this bike is available in the United States. If you're from the States, go drive across the border, because our Canadian dollar is so weak, you will probably get a smoking deal if you came to Canada to buy your next bicycle. And this has been the Revolt 1, and I look forward to seeing you guys more in 2025 now that we're starting to see 2025 bike models roll in. If you like listening to an old man talk about new bikes, you may as well subscribe, like, press buttons, do all the things, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks so much.